On behalf of Helsinki Contemporary, I'm really happy to welcome you all to this, our first ever Zoom talk. I'm really excited to introduce our two speakers. Jonna Kina, who is a really versatile artist who works with a multitude of different media, for example, film, video, sound, sculpture, installation, performance, and so on. Jonna's exhibition Afterlife is now on view at Helsinki Contemporary and runs through May 2nd. Kina has graduated both from the Academy of Fine Arts in Helsinki and from Aalto University, and she has exhibited widely internationally, and also her works have been awarded in many festivals, for example. Amanda Schmitt is a New York-based curator who currently also works as the director of Kaufman Repetto Gallery, with locations in Europe, for example. Amanda focuses in her work on video, sound, performance, and time-based media, and she has curated over 60 exhibitions. We had the pleasure of working with Amanda in 2019 when she curated the group exhibition Future Delay at Helsinki Contemporary. Currently, Amanda is also curating a group exhibition entitled An Ego of Her Own, which will open in the fall of 2021. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ina, for such a warm introduction, and thank you to Helsinki Contemporary for setting up this panel today and for inviting me here to join Jonna in conversation. And congratulations to Jonna for opening the exhibition just last week. I'm very happy to be here with you today. This is quite interesting for me as someone who works with sound and video to do a Zoom about this body of work, because you know, the magic of working with digital, you know, work that can be shared digitally is that anyone can experience it anywhere at any time, which makes it, you know, wonderful to have this dialogue. But the challenge is also that I haven't actually seen this exhibition in person. So Jonna and I have had a couple of conversations leading up to today's talk. And I think we'll get to it a little bit later on, talking about sound and video art and the actual sort of physical nature of the object and what it means in the exhibition space. But I also am very excited to have this conversation over Zoom, because on one hand, these Zoom talks, this kind of Zoom tour has really become a phenomenon of this last year, but it's actually something that I've really been a proponent and supporter of for many, many years. So in some ways, I don't want to say the pandemic is a good thing. That's absolutely a terrible thing that's happened, but it's sort of made an opportunity for the world to embrace these kind of digital technologies that help us to connect, you know, from halfway across the globe together. So I'm very happy to be here. I thought, since some who are joining the panel today maybe also haven't seen the show in person or can't because, you know, maybe you're in another country or you just can't make it to Helsinki, we'd actually look at a few of the pieces and have a discussion about it. So the exhibition is entitled Afterlife, and the nexus of the exhibition are two films that were conceived as a diptych called Afterlife and Red Impasto Jar. They are two short-form films that explore transcendental issues through archaeological and illegal excavations of tombs. And actually, before I go any further, Jonna, would you, I know that these are films, but are you exhibiting, since I haven't seen the work in the exhibition, are you exhibiting it, screening the work on film, or are they digitally transferred?
Yes, thank you, Amanda and Inna, for the introduction. So I will start with this question. Yes, they are digitally transferred, and they are here as a digital projection in this space. But I have worked with the 35mm film.
Okay, great. We can talk about digital transference too a little bit later. Yeah. But I thought we could start by talking about these two films. So, and we'll watch a little of each. In Red Impasto Jar, the camera is focused on an ancient Faliscan piece of, am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, Faliscan, I think so.
Piece of pottery balanced upon a mechanized turning platform. which undergoes a 360-degree revolution. The film is inspired by the artist's discovery of this burial object, which had been looted from a tomb and cemented into a wall before ending up in an Italian museum where Jonna found it. And Afterlife is, in contrast, sort of a slow and poetic film focused on nature, a world of greenery, trees, leaves, brooks and ripples on water. In this piece, we hear the sounds of nature and we're lulled into a state of calm serenity. In fact, I think there is sort of a sense of serenity while looking at both of these films. And the show also includes a sound artwork entitled Confessions Piece for a Voice, which is accompanied by a series of photo engravings. So it's sort of a four-part exhibition, 2 films, 1 sound work, and some photo engravings. And just correct me if I'm wrong with any of that. And I'm going to show some clips of both of these films, but first I wanted to start with an introductory question, which is the title of the exhibition is Afterlife. And this is also the title of one of the films. But how does the one film Afterlife inform all of the works in the exhibition? And what is the significance for you of the concept of afterlife as a sort of guiding principle for this exhibition?
Yeah, well, it's a very sensitive and a huge subject matter. Mm-hmm. Also, it's a very personal and intimate. Death, we face death, everyone alone, but also together. And I think that the title connects all the 3 works here. But also there is this kind of a word play that it's not a one word, it has 2 different words, and that's very important difference for me. And yeah, it deals with life, death, burial rituals, time, existence, but also it refers to future. So, and it's also the title of one of the films here. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had sort of struggled with whether to look at Afterlife or Red Impasto Jar first, but I thought I would start with Red Impasto Jar since that's the first piece that I saw. So we're just going to take a look at it. So this is an excerpt of the film, which is about 4 minutes in length, the original piece. So could you tell us the story behind this jar, how you came across it, and what about it interested you so much to make it the subject of this very kind of sumptuous and focused film?
Yeah, so it's about the object and its transformation, something that was meant for afterlife, but then it was used in this one. I was visiting a small archaeological museum in 2017, and then I became interested about this object that I saw there, especially about its story and this kind of radical transformation that it had went through. This is a Faliscan, belonging to the Faliscan culture. It's this kind of a jar. Actually, the Red Impasto Jar is archaeological term for the object. Mm-hmm. And for me, this object seemed to tell this kind of multidimensional story about the aura of the object, the afterlife, scientific valuing, past and present, our relationship to other cultures and so on. And so it's coming from illegal excavation. It has been looted from a tomb, and then it has been probably used as a decorative element. It has been cast to a wall, and then later it was handed to the museum.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because it was looted many, ages ago, right?
Yeah,
the original looting.
Yeah.
Which is a subject I want to, get to a little bit later on, issues of repatriation and so on. This one actually it's exhibited, however, in the same region in which it would have originally been used and lived with, correct?
Yeah. Yes, correct.
Could you tell us a little bit about this region that you were in and what brought you there?
Yeah, so it's a very small town called Mazzano Romano. It's about half an hour drive from Rome to north. And there is this when we talk about more about the film Afterlife that has been shot in the close to the ancient city of Narce. So it has belonged to Faliscan culture. There is also this kind of old city. And what I was doing there, I was participating to Artist in Residency program. So I spent there 2 months. And then actually I went back to Rome in 2019. I had a solo show there. So that was also a chance to go again to study the object and continue the collaboration with the museum and so on. Also, I think my working methods, how I work, sometimes they require quite a lot of that I have to do. They require time, and I spend quite a lot of time to the research.
Yeah.
And
I'm impressed that you were able to gain permission from this museum to use this ancient artifact and to place it on a mechanic sort of motor that you had found, and then film it, let alone, to take it out for your own private research. What was that process like? Yeah,
actually this jar is also shown in the museum, in the vitrine, but it's also shown there as a kind of, they have this educational approach to show to the local audience and to others that when there is this kind of object that are not discovered through archaeological examinations and they are being looted, we lose the kind of the context. And then even though these artifacts are later on returned to the museum, but it's so important, the discovery context. And about the motor, this is interesting because for me, the motor being visible became very important and essential. It's also like showing the structures and the mechanism behind this movement, but also it creates this dialogue with this 2,500 years object.
Yeah, two very different objects, and might I say, with Afterlife, two very different films. So with that, I'm going to show a clip of Afterlife, and then we can speak about how they were conceived as a diptych. So, one moment. So
I'm sorry about the sound quality. It's just for the audience.
Yeah, when you actually are seeing it there's this incredible, these incredibly relaxing sounds of birds chirping and water running and leaves rustling and my impression the first time I saw the film was just like absolute happiness and serenity, just kind of feeling like, oh, you know, I'm out there in this beautiful kind of summer landscape. But the location in which you were filming is actually an ancient necropolis, which is really a burial ground, which has all this overgrowth. And but at the same time, there's a lot of life because you hear insects, you hear birds, you see all these trees and plants are growing. So there's this concept of afterlife. You know, there are, you know, this is a place where people were buried. This is a place where an entire civilization was thriving, which is now gone, but new life has come after. So I think there is this very kind of like poetic and straightforward metaphor in this film. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you conceived these two as a diptych.
Yes, I think them as or we can think them as a diptych, but also I think it's, we can think them as separated works. For me, the Afterlife, it frames the context of the site and also the current state of the site. Also, possibly the jar is originating from this site. Of course, it's not certain exactly from where because it was looted, so we don't know that. And so we see these ruins of the necropolis area, one of the necropolis area there, and also the story of them is that when they were found as looted when they were discovered by archaeologists in 2015. And so then the second part is more about the object and its transformation. So I wanted to create this kind of very detailed documentation of the object while it's rotating 360 degrees on this very industrial motor. So yeah, there is an object and then kind of the context and the site. And while I was we were filming the Afterlife, it was much more like kind of organic situation. We were hiking in the forest and then just kind of very intuitively I chose which scenes I want. I already knew that I want a lot of nature, but then I want to show at some point this necropolis area. But also that kind of it's more poetic, kind of thinking about the afterlife, that thinking about the future, and so on. Yeah, but actually I have made this singular channel diptych version for the film festival, and it will be shown in Berlinale at the Forum expanded program. So first we see Afterlife, and then it's followed by the Red Impasto Jar film.
Yeah, I think they're both very poetic, and I think they really do speak to the concept that less is more. You know, they are quite minimal, both of them, especially Red Impasto Jar. The viewer has, you know, a fixed viewpoint, and the only thing moving is this jar at actually a very slow pace. But I know that these works are more complicated than they seem. And I thought it might be interesting for some of the people on this call today to learn more about how something like this is made, because I was looking at the captions on these work, and both works include a number of collaborators, at least a dozen for each piece. So you credit, and some artists, when they're making film work, it's just, you know, the artist's name and that's who's made it. But you also credit the cinematographer, sound design, electronic consulting, post-production, and even an archaeological advisor. And I understand, looking at you know, a larger body of your work, you know, your larger body of work through learning about it over these last weeks, that the element of collaboration is quite important in your work. And I'm wondering if you could speak about how that is important to you, and how do you balance working with so many interlocutors?
Yeah, so collaboration, I see it as a very typical aspect to my working. Also, I see collaboration as a possibility. And for example, this sound work, Confession Piece for Voice, I worked with composer Lauri Supponen. And together we create the composition for this artwork. And especially in that process, I think we both enriched the process. We are coming from very different backgrounds and different starting points. And in the film works, I have been working long time with the cinematographer Ville Piippo that I met by chance in Paris. And we shot our first collaboration was we shot together the arrangement for a scene where we see two Foley artists working together. But sometimes, of course, the collaboration can be more like consultation or mentoring, or in the form of discussions. And if I have a chance, I really want to credit the people who has been there. And I think working together I think we can achieve something that I would not achieve alone. But of course, there's also many collaborators and people that are maybe in the tanks. There are so many people who has helped me. Actually, funny story is when I was mastering the sounds for the confession piece for voice, I was driving a car in this kind of very remote small village was my goal where I was going. And then suddenly the car broke and I was left there and it was freezing outside, and I had a really tight schedule to finalize the sounds so we can do the vinyl pressing. And so I was like, oh my God, and I started to hitchhike. And then there was this, in this pandemic time, it's not, maybe not so many people will take you in, but then there was this person who took me and he actually drove me all the way, like 1 hour to the destination I was going. So all this kind of, sometimes even they are not so much, they are more just that people are helping you in this kind of even weird situation. So yeah, I think it's very important.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a contemporary phenomenon, and I've just been thinking about sort of the ups and downs of how collaborators are credited. There's this very modernist idea of an artist being a solo figure, a painter at their easel, alone with their paint. But you're actually working, with so many different people. But this is nothing new, really. You think back to artists of the Renaissance or even to Roman times, and they worked with entire ateliers of collaborators, not just assistants, but collaborators and experts in their field. But so often it would just be, this work is Michelangelo, or this work is Raphael, or this is Bernini. So okay, I'm kind of going back to Italy and Rome, of course, because that's a main subject in our discussion today. But I think it is very much a contemporary phenomenon for artists like you or who work in media to include their collaborators, and I think that's quite special. And it also, it spirals. It leads people to want to know, oh, what kind of work is this composer doing, for example, and it networks out.
Yeah.
I think that brings us to a good opportunity to listen to the sound piece in this show, Confession Piece for a Voice. So we had decided that we would actually listen to it in the exhibition space to have a sense of how it's meant to be experienced when you visit the show.
So.
I listen This horrible thing and all these are and
So one of my first impressions when hearing this piece the first time was that it was quite haunting, which I think is quite appropriate considering that we're talking about afterlife, and to have afterlife, we must have death. And even just watching it in the space right now, it's almost like there's a ghost singing. It's a bit of a romantic notion. But I thought that this could be an interesting opportunity to talk about the material versus immaterial aspect of sound. In fact, last time I was in Helsinki, the show that I curated was a show about sound art, and I did a talk with Data about sound art. And I think sound art is still this medium that it's very much accepted, but I think is very much understood, especially from a conservation and transference, point of view, because you can't just, it's not, it's not an MP3 that you can just share and have it, that's the piece. Some sound art is situational, some uses specific types of microphones, some must involve a performer. So although before we spoke today, I had an MP3 of this piece and I was able to listen to it. It's really meant to be listened to in the exhibition space. And I think so maybe you could talk about the importance of that, because it's not only the echoing within the space, it's not only the fact that the gallery is mostly empty, yep, and also that the films are playing to the side. And I have to add one extra little special perk, which is where Helsinki Contemporary is located. For those who don't know the space, it's located across the street from a pretty old cemetery, if I'm not mistaken. So there is all these kind of interwoven aspects that have to be considered when you're in the space listening to this piece, right?
Yeah, and for me, it became very important that during the process that, first of all, it will be a vinyl, that maybe it also comes from in the process, I was doing research on ancient tomb poetry, and also studying this that I mentioned earlier, also in our discussion, this Seikilos epitaph that is from 1st century CE from ancient Greece, and it's one of the oldest, or actually it's the oldest complete notated musical composition. So this kind of, it's a carving on a marble stele, this kind of pillar shape tombstone. And I think what is interesting is that it's a message for the living. It's also interestingly ironic, but also encouraging. So spending time with that, but also it became more important that I want that the sound is carved physically on this material. But also then became the idea that it will be more like a performative act, that the sound piece actually it's silent all the time unless somebody wants to hear it. And also this kind of, that it's this participation is important, that you want to hear, you want to be heard. It's a communication, and there's something I think especially it changed the listening, that when you're listening, when you choose to listen, that it's not just something going on, but then you really choose to listen, it really changed hopefully the experience, at least for me.
You have to put the needle on, you have to initiate.
Yeah, and also that brings this, that how we are kind of inside of our bodies, that we are, flesh, and maybe our hand is a little bit shaking, or, I think that's also a very important part, that it brings this kind of human aspect to the work.
Yeah. So would you consider the vinyl record almost a sculptural object?
Yeah, yes.
Because then it's totally unique, right?
Yeah, and I think, well, it's very mechanical. This is, for example, going like 45 round per minute. You can also follow, if you want, the movement, or just wander around the space. And the photo etching series became important just to show as well the structures of the work, but also that it enables you to read the libretto. That is very important, and the whole concept. It's a conceptual piece. So to read it, maybe before you listen to the piece, or just maybe also that experiencing sound and music through language, symbols, or images is important. And there's also what I have been working on with some other my earlier pieces, like Foley objects, photography series.
Yeah. One thing I haven't been able to ask you, and just so our visitors on this call know, there are a number of sound artworks that Jonna has made, which if we have time we can look at a few of them. But what is your personal background with sound, and what drew you to start or sort of focusing on sound as a primary medium in your practice?
Oh, this is a hard question. Yeah.
Because it's different than coming into music. Some people who, or maybe music is the root of it all. Yeah. But I think people who are musicians, or maybe who work with electronic music or do sound effects, they have a musical background. It starts with a scale, and then that evolves. Or maybe you were in a band, but I'm curious if it started somewhere musically, or if it started perhaps maybe through a fascination with cinema even, or
I think for me it started maybe at the same time when I was able to think. Maybe I was, 4 years old, 3 years old, that the sound was very essential, and the music. And I remember my very first experience with sound is with wall clock, that I couldn't get sleep. I was maybe at 3, 4 years old, and then I could start to compose music with that clock, so that I could control that sound in my mind and make this kind of very complex structures, and then change the beat and the rhythm. And that kind of stayed with me, that also the sound that we can hear inside our mind, or we can compose music in our mind, or you can hear And what actually comes also, what is very important to me, the listening part. Always when I'm working with sound or with the idea of sound, the listening is very crucial part. It also is important, like what we listen, where, and in what kind of acoustic environment. But that's somehow where everything starts.
Yeah. So you had also mentioned there's the potentiality inherent in the vinyl record, but also in the photo engravings in this show, which is essentially it's the score to Confessions for a Voice, Confession Piece for a Voice, right? And you like the idea that you can sort of, if someone knows how to read a score, or maybe they don't, there's still the ability for one to sort of hear in their mind.
Yeah. Yeah, and also read the text. It's like a poem that you can, if you don't understand, or like if you don't know how exactly to read the score, I think the text is also very, very important. And that's the main reason that I wanted it to be visible together with this work.
Yeah. So I thought, since we're talking about the importance of sound in your work, and I think we have some time, I could just play an excerpt of a kia, an arrangement for a scene, because I think, you know, I feel like where we're going with this is that sound actually isn't an immaterial medium. There's very much a material element to it. And I think a piece like arrangement, both of these pieces really illustrate this quite clearly, but in different ways. So let's watch Kia first. These are not in the exhibition. And I'm just gonna turn down the sound, because the sounds, I apologize to everyone. I didn't figure out the zoom too expertly, and the sound quality of this piece isn't gonna come across too clearly, but there is an excerpt on Jonna's website if you're interested in hearing it. But I think what is important for me to illustrate here is that this piece has a sound element, but we're actually looking at the reel-to-reel recorder playing the piece. And I think that this really also relates to the Red Impasto Jar, because there is this interest in the mechanical in your work. So I feel like there are some interesting elements, the mechanical, and also Afterlife, and also treating the body as a mechanical element that eventually will stop running one day, right? And yeah.
Yeah. It's actually interesting to see this. I already noticed when I was working with the Red Impasto Jar that there is similarities with the choreography with this piece and also with the Red Impasto Jar, where there is this motor that's very mechanical and very important part of the process. Here as well, the choreography of the reel-to-reel tape recorder. And we even built a remote controller, because I didn't want to that there is a hand touching the machine when it goes on and so on.
Yeah. And this piece is very multi-layered, and I think it maybe is better suited to a more developed discussion about it. But I wanted to point it out specifically because there's almost this fetishization of the object that allows us to hear, or the machines that allow us to record. And that also is, you know, they haven't, in the past, you would have to write down the score. And so the score is a very ancient technology, whereas the reels, actually a vinyl is a more contemporary technology, but then this reel-to-reel recorder is even more contemporary. So there's constantly these updates about how we can record and transmit sound, or sort of the idea of the act of recording. How does one, it's the same kind of concept of memory. How does one pass forward audio information to another generation? And I feel like in a way you're also doing that with your work.
Yeah, and I also studied when I started this confession piece for voice. I studied also like phonographs, and I was even thinking that this recording could be on a wax cylinder. But so I made some research and I even tested some, but then yeah, it was somehow it didn't went that direction in the end.
Do you think that you might explore other audio recording or audio devices as subjects in your work, like CD players, for example?
Yeah, it is an option, and I think it comes though very intuitively. When I'm working with the piece, I try to keep it very open. Like, what is the final result? That I start with, you know, first is the idea, and I work very conceptually, and then often the work creates itself. That it has its own demands. That you are just also a medium in that process.
Yeah. So just to sort of make this conversation more round, I do want to show arrangement for a scene, which is a reenactment of a scene from a Hitchcock film using two Foley artists. So I'll play it first, and then we can discuss it from there. And I hope the sound isn't too awful.
Yeah.
But I think what's important here is the performative element. So, could you explain to us what's happening here?
Yes, so there is two Foley artists, and they are watching the film, the Psycho shower scene, and then they're reenacting the sounds for that scene. And they are both professional Foley artists, Gilles Marsalet and Elodie Fiat, and I met them while I was in Paris, Cité des Arts, doing an artist residency. And I knew already then when I went there that I would like to do this piece after I had done this Foley object photography series, where I collected this sound effect objects from various Foley artists. And then in the photograph, we see the object, and under the photograph is a text, a title that refers to the sound that this certain object had created. So this was kind of a I was continuing this work, but also actually I did this film already 2014. It was a 3-channel film, but somehow I thought that it's not ready yet. So this time I work with two Foley artists, and also I wanted to try to use a 35mm film and do it as a one take, but also so that it consists this making of elements in the beginning and also in the end. And what was important to me is also that the gaze of the Foley artists, that it feels like they are watching to us, even though they are watching the film in front of them.
Mm-hmm. I actually didn't know what Foley was until I saw this piece. Is this something that's quite common in cinema? Like, rather than the actual scene being recorded, it is actually created artificially?
Yes, this is a very common, it was invented by Jack Foley in the late 1920s in Universal Studios in the United States. And actually, when I was doing my graduation work in 2011, we were doing the sounds in a post-production because we couldn't use anything that we recorded on the site. So that's the first time when I realized that this Foley effects, they exist. And also, I think I had this kind of shock that that we are not hearing the real sounds in films, but we are hearing just kind of this artificial illusions. I don't know. And so I started to do the research, and then this folio object photography series became, and then I still wanted to continue that. And also this, why I chose this psycho shower scene, it's something that is in our collective memory, that we don't have to see it again, but also it's kind of also deconstructing that and creating this reverse cinema experience.
Yeah. It must be so fascinating to see the different objects that Foley artists use. And obviously you feel the same way because you made this whole photo series of these objects. But it's interesting that they would be labeled as the sound that they make, that it has, nothing, really wouldn't seem to have anything to do with the actual utilitarian, original intention for why that object was produced.
Yeah, and I think because you can use. It really depends on what is the scene that you use different kind of object. For example, if you want to, I don't know, create the sound of clothes. That is it like a scene where two people are making love, or is it like two people are fighting, or is it somebody is running for her life, or it's. So then you, of course, this was maybe a bad example, but just to kind of that you might use different tools. So each time you might use something very unique, but of course there is very kind of classical things that you might use, like aluminum foil to use make sound of fire and so on. They are more common.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about this from an archaeological perspective, the work that you're making, the confusion that will lie when someone, hundreds, thousands of years from now finds this video that you made, or even these objects, these photographs that you made that sort of mislabel what they thought these tools were.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wish that.
Kind of remixing, confusing the future archaeologists with this body of work, which also is interesting going back to Red Impasto Jar, because it was sort of looted and used for, maybe inappropriate purposes or not its original purposes.
Yeah.
And that's your interest in that piece. I also wanted to talk about, it's hard for me to avoid sort of the kind of Catholic or Christian, Judeo-Christian ritual associated with the idea of confession. And I think, again, the reason I'm maybe drawn to this is because you made this work in Italy, and in Italy there really is no sort of more modern or contemporary post BC version of art without the Catholic Church. So confession, for me, I immediately associate the idea of confession with sort of the Catholic ritual. So why did you decide to title this piece? Why were you focused on the act of confession?
Yeah, and yeah, especially spending time in Italy was very important. And when I was spending time in this little village and getting to know local people and to talk with them and to hear stories. And when I started to work on this confession piece for voice, I wanted that it's kind of a small opera or operetta where this theme of remorse is being interpreted by this in the form of a cappella singing. And also that it it could be thought as a portrait of a grave robber or thief or modern human. And this became important. So the libretto is based on a autobiographical work, Confessions, by Augustine. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think that work refers well to the themes that I was dealing with, but also more broadly. The essential question is kind of like how we live, how we should live in this life. And I think it relates, or it's actually very relevant in our current situation as well, like how we use natural resources or the loss of biodiversity and so on.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think because all started from the Red Impasto Jar and thinking about this idea of breaking into the grave, stealing something, and then eventually regretting kind of started me to work on this idea more broadly. And yeah, and then it became kind of more, how can I say it? I think through this work, confession, the title "Confession, Peaceful Voice," yeah, that's how it just came out.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, just to think about how, even Italian culture reconciles, the dominance of the Catholic Church today with sort of its ancient Roman traditions and sort of a polytheistic culture. And also thinking about the idea of afterlife and different perspectives to approach the concept of afterlife. There's so many. There's not just the Judeo-Christian concept of life and death and then salvation or even resurrection. But I thought about also approaching your work from belief systems such as like the Buddhist philosophy or Hindu philosophies of the karmic return or of reincarnation into these plants, in this necropolis, or even into this object. And even the concept of animism, this idea that this object that you were so fascinated that there might be some sort of spirit to that object that's drawn you towards it. So I think there's a lot of different ways in which one can approach the subjects in your show and also the concept of afterlife, because there is no definition of afterlife, right? Everyone has, their own personal, I guess, theory of what it might be, no way of knowing.
Yeah.
I wanted to sort of on that note and sort of wrap our conversation up with a passage that a historian named Marta Federici wrote about this body of work. And I just feel like she says it so perfectly and also wraps up some of the, my focus was on like everything that I just said about afterlife, religion, etc. And I feel like she puts it really nicely. So I'm just going to read it for the guests today. So this is the words of Marta Federici. In a passage from the book Autoritratto, by a self-portrait, written by the Italian art critic and feminist activist Carla Lonzi at the end of the 1960s, which I happen to have reread recently, the author recalls that as a young girl, she had approached religion before art, as a dimension in which to seek confirmation of the existence of deeper layers of reality. In Lonzi's personal journey, religious experience soon gave way to cultural commitment, but the basic desire remained the same: to connect with another way of feeling, to receive a deeper initiation into existence. From my point of view, this is the most powerful quality of Kina's work. They allow people to get closer to secret places that are not to be found in another space-time, but right here, nearby, in deeper layers of reality. They subtly lead us to a hidden elsewhere that lies between the realm of the invisible and the ineffable, and that cannot be described, but only perceived. I think she says it so perfectly, and I hope that is what I've gotten out of learning about your work in this exhibition, and I hope that those who are able to visit can also sort of experience that. But I think there is this, at least from me, an impulse to jump into sort of experiencing this or explaining this from a religious point of view, but the idea that art sort of supersedes that, or religion can bring us to art, and then art becomes religion. At least that's my own personal experience of it as well, and perhaps that's why art resonates with me so deeply. But that I think would be a good place to sort of wrap this up for today.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for making this work and for providing such fertile territory for us to have this conversation about it today.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So
thank you, Jonna and Amanda. That was a super interesting discussion. If you have any questions or comments, you can either type them to the chat box, or then if you want to, you can now turn on your microphone and camera and raise a hand if you want to comment or ask anything.
I had a lot of questions. I thought maybe a good one to ask to sort of kick it off is, what are you working on next? Now that you've got one done, what is the next sort of area of research?
Yes, so this will be collaboration, or like actually it's a commission work from Lappeenranta Art Museum. It will be collaboration with the Estonian Art Museum and Kumu Art Museum. I will continue to work on this topic with the museum and archiving.
My other question was, if you could have access to any ancient location or ancient object as your subject, which would it be and why?
Yes, this I think well, for me, I'm always interested about the story. So kind of that comes first. I think everything is like this Red Impasto Jar. It is because of its the object and this story behind it. So I think I don't have exactly anything, but yeah, it could be even some very ordinary object, perhaps, or something. If I would make a research and know a bit that there is something interesting, something that that I would like to share. That yeah.
Katja has raised her hand, so maybe she has a question.
Thank you. It was such an interesting and nice conversation. I was thinking, Jonna, it seems that travels and residency periods have had really important part of your work. As we hopefully sometime soon can travel again, where would you like to go? What would be landscape? Where would you like to be?
Yeah, this is, I think at the moment, I just feel like nature is so important to me that just going anywhere in the nature would be perfect for me to leave cities and to escape. But of course, somewhere, if I would be able to travel, somewhere in the nature, maybe on the mountains. Yeah. And of course, I miss going museums. So when this situation is over, I really look forward to spend time in museums.
Yeah. We have another question. How have people experienced this exhibition?
Maybe Inna or
or maybe I could answer or myself. But well, I've had the feeling that people have been just really enjoying the exhibition. Okay, now Mikaela has. Do you want to comment on this question?
Yeah, people have really enjoyed the exhibition. So many of them just spontaneously say they really loved it and feel like it has kind of touched them on a deeper level, I guess. Yeah.
Also, I would like to add that thinking of the sound work, many people have been very impressed by the detail that the sound work is put on for them. Oh, you are putting it for me. and once you're asking, would you like to hear it now? And people find it like very, like they're very impressed by it. So it has been really an important part of the work, definitely. It was beautifully thought, Jonna.
Element almost as if it's something sacred, you know, like very ritualistic.
Yeah.
Yes, art can be a gift. I think it is when you do play it. It is like it's a gift for the viewer. There's this on-demand quality of it too. You know, in this last year, I think we've all watched a lot of on-demand TV or movies. So to go to a gallery and have a sound artwork sort of on demand, it comes to in a very different way. So I think that must be a very refreshing experience. I only wish I could see it.
Yeah. Me too.